Okay, in Chapter 2, we discuss relevancy. Relevancy is the most important, one of the most important principles in evidence law. The issue is really very simple. In any case that is on trial, the parties can only present relevant evidence to prove or disprove the case. The party cannot introduce irrelevant evidence. So as a general principle, we say only relevant evidence is admissible, irrelevant evidence is not admissible. This point should be clear. If there is a criminal case, or if there is a criminal case, if the prosecution wants to show the defendant committed the crime, or if the defense trying to show the defendant did not commit the crime, they can only present relevant evidence. Of course, they cannot present evidence that is irrelevant to the issue. I think in principle this point is understandable, but when we really want to discuss this, the issue of relevancy, the issue actually is a lot more complicated, because in this relevancy discussion, we need to understand we have this two aspects of relevancy. One is the first one is the logical aspect of relevancy, and then we also have this second aspect, that is the materiality aspect of relevancy. So for an item of evidence to be judged relevant, the evidence must satisfy both aspects of relevancy. Meaning is, it must satisfy the logical aspect of relevancy, it must also satisfy the materiality aspect of relevancy. So now let's discuss what we mean by these two aspects of relevancy. We first discuss this logical aspect of relevancy. By this logical aspect of relevancy, we mean we have this definition from this federal rules of evidence. So by logical aspect of relevancy, you can just focus on this highlighted part, that is evidence having any tendency to make the existence of any fact more probable than or less probable than it would be without the evidence. Okay, that is the definition. Okay, that is the definition, relevant part of the definition from this federal rules of evidence. So pay attention to any tendency, and also more probable or less probable. Okay, so meaning is what we mean by this logical relevant, logical evidence. Okay, logical evidence means this is kind of evidence that has any tendency to make the fact more probable or less probable than it would be without the evidence. All right, so that is what we mean by this logical aspect of relevancy. So now we can take this, look at this example. We take this case of a trial for shoplifting. Suppose the defendant is on trial for shoplifting. The prosecution and the defense, they may offer logically relevant evidence to prove its case. For the prosecution, of course, the prosecution can ask a store clerk to testify that she actually witnessed the defendant trying to take this item out of the store without paying for the item. Or maybe the prosecution could also offer this surveillance video to show the defendant was in the act of committing this shoplifting. All right, so we know all this evidence would be relevant evidence because this evidence, if offered, that would have the tendency to make the fact that the defendant committed this crime more probable. All right, so that is a logical relevancy. All right, so for the defense, of course, the defense could also offer relevant evidence to show he did not commit the crime. For example, the defendant can offer someone to testify that on the day of the crime, and he actually had this alibi. Maybe a witness would come to court to say on the day of the crime, the defendant was actually with her, and so the defendant could not possibly be in the store to commit this shoplifting. Okay, so that is also logical. That is also the evidence that satisfies this logical aspect of relevancy, because if you offer this alibi evidence, that would make the fact that the defendant committed the shoplifting less probable than it would be without the evidence, right? So that would fit into this definition. Either you offer the evidence, make this fact more probable, or you offer this evidence to make this fact less probable. And then if the evidence would have that kind of tendency, that would satisfy the logical aspect of relevancy. All right, so actually, this logical aspect of relevancy is relatively easy to understand. It is not really that difficult. It's just a logical connection, and I'm sure you could also see this point. What is difficult to understand? It is this materiality aspect of relevancy. So once again, we come to this definition of relevancy. And then now it is the full definition. I did not omit any part in this definition. And so according to this full definition of relevancy, the evidence, what is a relevant evidence? That is evidence having any tendency to make the existence of any fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action more probable or less probable than it would be without the evidence. So in this presentation of the definition, you should pay attention once again to this highlighted part. That is, it is any fact. What kind of fact? It is any fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action. Okay? You can offer this logically connected evidence, but this logically connected evidence must be able to make this fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action more probable or less probable. It is not really you just offer the evidence to prove any fact. That has to be a fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action. Okay? So maybe once again we come to this example of this shoplifting case. All right? We discussed in this prosecution of this shoplifting, the prosecution can offer the evidence of someone's testimony about this committing of shoplifting, of this video surveillance, and to show the defendant was in the act of shoplifting. Those evidence would be relevant evidence. But say if the defendant is on trial for shoplifting, the prosecution intends to offer evidence to show the defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter. All right? So that is really, that is evidence, that is what prosecution tries to show. All right? The defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter. to prove this point, of course, the prosecution's factual proposition now is, or the fact the prosecution wants to prove is, the defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter. All right? How to show that? The prosecution would offer a copy of a court judgment showing that the defendant's father is convicted of shoplifting. All right? So the question is, can this evidence, that means the copy of this court judgment, be admissible or not, or this copy of a court judgment showing the defendant's father was a convicted shoplifter, whether this evidence is relevant or not. All right? Okay. The analysis is this. Okay? The copy of this court judgment satisfies the logical aspect of relevancy. Why? Because what the prosecution tries to prove here, what is the prosecution's factual proposition? The prosecution said the defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter. All right. So now the prosecution offers this evidence, offers this a copy of a court judgment to show the defendant's father indeed is convicted of shoplifting. So is this a copy of a court judgment satisfy the logical aspect of relevancy? Yes, it is, because by showing this a copy of court judgment, that can show that the defendant's father indeed is a convicted shoplifter. All right, but is this evidence relevant? Is this evidence admissible? The answer is no. Why? Because this evidence is not relevant, because this evidence fails to satisfy the materiality aspect of relevancy. All right? Why? Because we understand it is not the prosecution may offer this evidence to prove any fact. Okay? The prosecution can only offer the evidence to prove the fact that is of a consequence to the determination of the action. Okay? What we are trying to determine in this case, whether the defendant committed the crime of shoplifting or not. So the fact whether the defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter has nothing to do with this action. If you can prove the defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter, could that help the court determine whether the defendant committed the crime of shoplifting? No. Defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter, whether you can prove that or you cannot prove that, that has nothing to do with the fact whether the defendant committed the shoplifting or not. So if you want to prove the fact that the defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter, this fact is of no consequence to the determination of the action. So that's why this evidence fails the materiality aspect of relevancy. So this evidence would be irrelevant. Okay, we did say for item of evidence to be relevant, it must satisfy both aspects of relevancy. So for this evidence, the copy of judgment showing the defendant's father is a convicted shoplifter, this fact, this evidence fails to satisfy the materiality aspect of relevancy, so it is irrelevant. It would not be admissible.